Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a valuation expert in St. Louis, Missouri. I have the pleasure of discussing fraud and forensic accounting with Chris Ekimoff, a certified fraud examiner and CPA in Washington, D.C. Chris also serves as an expert witness in matters of SEC financial reporting, complex GAAP accounting, whistleblower, mortgage-backed securities litigation. I mean, where are you not doing stuff, Chris? Welcome.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Melissa.
Do you have any other good fraud stories you can share that are kind of juicy? I know in divorce, we always have really interesting stories, but let's nerd out a little bit and talk about some fun accounting stories.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about the numbers, right, and where did the money go? But a lot of times when you're sitting in kind of what I'll call a quasi-internal audit role or an internal investigations role, you'll be asked to review qualitative information, non-quantitative information. So I'd received a complaint on behalf of a company at some point where an individual was alleging that the department head of the group that this individual was in was playing favorites with another individual in that group because they had a personal relationship together. So we, tried to identify things from a financial or an HR perspective and didn't really see any other complaints until we took the download of their Microsoft Outlook calendars and we tracked their travel and PTO together. And so department head would go on a trip to West Coast office. Amazingly, the alleged personal relationship would have time off for the 2 days that person was out west. We then see, on the other side, the department, the staff person in the department would take a week's vacation, and also the department head would take a week's vacation the same day. So we took that information, compiled it, and put together a calendar over about 8 months that showed I'll say coincidences, right? We didn't take this to the level of hotel receipts and things like that, but we wanted the department head to know from an internal investigation standpoint that their conduct was identified as potentially being problematic, and they needed to explain to the folks that they worked with why that was the case or stop the behavior, right? So that didn't end in terminations. It ended up in a reassignment of those two individuals, so they weren't direct subordinates or reporting to each other in that facet. But we color coded the males travel as blue squares and the females travel as pink squares. And they magically lined up in a way that looked like a really interesting mosaic if you look at it from that perspective. So, I mean, personal relationships, right? I talked earlier about investigating people. That's always an interesting side of the coin. And then, one other story we did just recently, we helped they're not a private equity firm, but a company that invests in distressed businesses in an attempt to revitalize them and, bring them to profit. A lot of times they'll be interested in the relationships between the entity they invest in and other subsidiaries or third parties involved with the company they invested in. So we do a lot of public record searches and background checks and things like that on individuals and companies to help understand the spider web of relationships that they might have. So if Chris Ekimoff and my sister's married, her last name's not Ekimoff, it's Reed. You might not know on paper that we're related, but if Chris Ekimoff is contracting with vendor, Reed and Co., that's a relationship that a public record search might identify, right? Her previous last name was Ekimoff. So, we conducted a search of over 38 individuals and 50 business entities and found out that 90% of them were linked in some way, shape, or form. And that's between personal relationships. You can understand neighbors, right? Properties that are next to each other or in the same apartment building, and presented that back to our client who wanted us to do some due diligence on their investor, on the investment that they had made, and come to realize that the, $100 million of revenue and the $80 million of expense that was spent, that, 70% of that $80 million, or excuse me, 70 million of that $80 million was being spent on people related to or personal friends of the CEO of the company they invested in. So again, I'm not saying that they inappropriately, paid for services, but that's an investment decision that had the kind of quasi private equity company known, they probably wouldn't have gotten in with this organization because it was just so tightly, mapped together that it was hard to tell where the service is being market rate, where those relationships appropriate. So it was a wild spider web. I wish I could show the relationship map we had because it kind of looked like a Jackson Pollock painting with everything being connected in the middle.
Well, and the first story that you told is this kind of this whistleblower concept. So these companies kind of have this process that you can call a 1-800 number and anonymously leave a tip. And then the company will have you come in and kind of investigate that tip? Because they kind of need somebody from the outside. Probably.
That's right. Yeah. And they'll be done, depending on each company's different, right? So some of them will be held internally and there'll be HR complaints and like equal opportunity employment complaints or discrimination. And they'll bifurcate them all between different investigators and different topics. So oftentimes, my bread and butter is on the financial side. So inappropriate travel and entertainment expense, allegations of bribery, corruption, kickback schemes that you talked about a little bit. But sometimes, we'll be working with a company that doesn't have a strong compliance group. They outsource that. They have one lawyer that works in an external firm who's kind of their whole HR, legal, compliance, general counsel department. And they'll say, hey, Chris, I know you and your team does this kind of stuff. Can you take a look? And so that's where we'll get pulled in. And again, we won't opine on the HR side of the coin because that's not our specialty, but we'll be able to line up that data and that information to help them make decisions on how they want to approach those individuals.